Laurel, let me tell you something.
All right, tell me.
It's my favorite day of the week
Why is that?
because it's Sunday, and that's the day before Monday, which is the day that the Melodies and Masterpieces podcast drops at approximately 12 p.m. every Monday and Thursday.
Oh my gosh, we have an upload schedule now?
Probably, I don't know. It's probably not going to stay the same because I procrastinate a lot, and it's going to fall. Anyway, welcome to the Melodies and Masterpieces podcast, the only podcast by creatives work for creatives, with your two hosts, Omar and Laurel, here to talk about something that is a pretty cool subject for today. So, today we each had little assignments. We actually prepared little pieces to talk about in front of everybody today for the class.
Show and tell almost.
Yeah, show and tell. So, let me ask you, what did you do today? And what'd you do today?
Like what I did in general or like what I researched?
Both.
So what I did today is that I went to work, because it seems like every time we talk on this podcast, I'm talking about how I work. And while I was at work, I researched for my little topic of today, which is going to be talking about, the tragic artist archetype and stereotype and what it has become in the modern day.
Okay. And what does that mean? Like tragic artist for like all the boomers in the audience.
Okay, so the tragic artist stereotype is kind of like, the artist that's like sad and riddled with mental illness and, is like, it's like struggling to make a living and all that intense like stuff that comes with the stereotype of artists.
Okay. And what kind of stuff did you want to talk about that?
Oh, are we starting? We're not introducing yours, we're just starting mine?
Well, mine will come into play in a bit, because it's kind of a bit separate, but I want you to talk about yours first.
All right.
Because we never had like a you subject centered episode yet. We got to start getting those.
Let me get my iPad out.
All right.
Because I wrote stuff down. So
Laurel
like
has
there's
an
yeah, I'm using my iPad for once. So for like many years now, there's been the whole artist, like tragic artist, the artist that struggles to make a living is, dealing with a lot of mental illness, and like that's been around for literally years because the stereotype is backed up by a fair amount of evidence. But it's hard to link mental health and artistic ability together, but it's not unlikely that psychological disorders, like any other like different state of mind, can shake an individual and shape their creative like output and behavior. So I have 3 examples of artists that may have bolstered the stereotype a little bit.
So before we get started, I just want to preface. So you tell us a bit about. Well, I already know, but tell everybody else about, what you're studying in school, any like accolades you've earned so far, and your general progress in your education.
Well, I'm studying psychology, and right now I'm learning about, experimental psychology, so like the studies that are done, and clinical psychology, which is, the one-on-one therapies. I'm also going towards my minor in school, which is child advocacy and law. So basically I'm going to be learning about, a child's place in, society and law, and what protections and what can be done for a child in let's say an abusive or bad situation.
Cool. And I believe you told me a while ago that you earned some type of sort of certification to run your own independent studies.
Oh yeah. What was it, like a little over a year ago? I forget exactly what it was, but yeah, I did like a little state test, and it basically lets me run my own like experimental studies within the state of New Jersey.
So this is not just like a hobbyist perspective. This is something that you, on your free time, do a lot of research and deep dive into.
Oh yeah, I love the psych world, and I do a ton of, deep diving into it may be considered niche subjects and everything.
So this is a
But
professional, absolutely country certified point of view.
no,
Laurel just recently
no.
earned her PhD in psychological medicine and is prepared
Yeah.
to give a live diagnosis to not only myself but the viewers. So Laurel, please proceed.
Thanks. What Omar said is not true at all. I am just working towards my bachelor's. Please don't take my stuff seriously. Anyways, so artists have always been tagged with this, like, this like struggling archetype, with the idea that artists will always forever struggle, they won't get money, they're usually like different people. And I feel like this whole stereotype can easily be, supported by these like famous individuals that a lot of people may quote and be like, oh, well, this artist, had problems. So some of those people would be Vincent van Gogh. He's like the poster boy for tragic artists. But around 2016, a bunch of expert psychologists met to discuss the possible mental illnesses that Van Gogh had. This event was actually organized by the Vincent van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. So it was an actual effort to see what was going on. It wasn't just people being like, oh, let's look at this artist. He was kind of sad, so let's see what's going on.
If I may interrupt you real quick, I would just like to take a moment
Yeah.
to read the first couple sentences of the Vincent van Gogh Wikipedia article, the most reliable source of information on this man,
Wikipedia.
because there might be people out there who don't know exactly his whole story. So, as expressed in this Wikipedia article, Vincent William van Gogh was a Dutch post-impressionist painter who was among the most famous and influential figures in the history of Western art. In just over a decade, he created approximately 2,100 artworks, including around 860 oil paintings. He was born in Zundert, Netherlands on March 30th, 1853, and died in Auvers-sur-Oise, France. I definitely didn't say that right. On July 29th, 1890. And he has a very stunning red beard, I must say.
He's the guy that, the artist that cut off his ear. That's his claim to fame, and Starry Night, obviously. But with these psychologists that came together, and that was sponsored by the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam and everything, it was concluded that it was possible that he had bipolar disorder, BPD, an alcohol dependency disorder, and borderline personality disorder, possibly suffered from psychotic episodes. He's a special guy, to say the least. Then there's another one, Edvard Munch. He had a rough childhood that would really shape his future. He had an overly religious and overzealous father who led him down the path of extreme anxiety and fear over death and hell. He's been quoted saying many times that he has been standing with the angels of anxiety, worry, and death all of his life. He was born with them at his side. And one quote, he said that and I would often wake at night and stare widely at the room and wonder, am I in hell? Basically. So he was very afraid. He had like one would say religious trauma even. But some psychologists have said that he suffers from anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, and among many other illnesses. And that's from Cambridge.
So
They did some research.
If I could take a step back at Van Gogh for a second. So I actually went to like the Van Gogh experience in Atlantic City.
I wanted to go to that.
I
would kill to see that.
I think it was like my mom or my sister got free tickets or something, but we got VIP passes to the Van Gogh experience at the Hard Rock Hotel in Atlantic City, I believe. And it was basically this like 3-stage walk-through museum about Van Gogh's art pieces and his life. It starts out with these holographic like cubes that have paintings as well as little descriptions about points in his life. The second room is like this sensory room with like basically lights flashing everywhere. And then the third room, which is like the most famous part, it's a fully projected room that constantly fades in and out of his pieces throughout his entire life. One of the blocks that had a bit about his life. I just wanted to read here. I took a picture of it when I went. And it talks about how a short time after his ear incident, meaning when he cut it off, Van Gogh knew there was something wrong with him, and he committed himself to...
He did. He committed himself to a institution.
Yes, he committed himself to the Saint Remy de Provence asylum. It says here, through bouts of illness, he kept on working on his art, creating some of his most famous masterpieces, such as, like you mentioned, the Starry Night piece was actually created, inspired by his view from his window in the asylum. And it says here in one of his letters that he wrote himself, "Through the iron-barred window, I can make out a square of wheat in an enclosure, above which, in the morning, I see the sun rise in its glory."
Yeah,
I thought that was pretty cool.
It's really intense.
And you go on with...
He's one of the like few that I've heard of that actually committed themselves to an institution, knowing that there was something wrong. The last example I have of this tragic artist stereotype would be Frida Kahlo. I love Frida Kahlo's art so much. But Frida Kahlo, she dealt with horrible misfortunes throughout her entire life. She had a tumultuous relationship with her husband, Diego Rivera, but she also dealt with chronic pain, and she dealt with multiple, and I mean multiple, miscarriages, which is awful for any woman. And with that all being said, you know, with the rough relationship with her husband, with miscarriages, with chronic pain that she would deal with on a daily basis, it was quoted that she suffered from acute depression and anxiety, possibly, and this is from the National Alliance of Mental Illness in Montana. So artists have always had this, you know, stereotype attached to them, and even in modern day, like, the stereotype, like, precedes itself. When you think of someone, like, when someone says, "Oh, I'm going into art," you think of the tragic artist stereotype. Oh, someone who doesn't make money, someone who's riddled with mental illness, someone who is gonna struggle their entire life. When I was first thinking of going to college myself, and I said I wanted to go to art, like into art originally, I was met with criticisms of being a starving artist and being a tortured artist and everything. But something crazy about that is that, like, in modern day, there are people that deal with that harmful stereotype, and then the people that want that harmful stereotype attached to them.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a big thing with our age group, I think, most apparently.
And there's that glorification of mental illness, and it's, and, like, you know, the Munchausen by proxy and all that insane stuff. And I see it online a lot with the glorification of mental illness, when really it's like a really detrimental thing to glorify. There was the whole thing with people glorifying, what was it, DID, dissociative identity disorder, previously known as multiple personality disorder. DID is when there's, you know, technically multiple people in one body, which is terrifying to think about. Like, you have a hard enough time discovering yourself and learning who you are as a person. Imagine, like, you know, 6 other people in there too. People, I don't know if you saw a lot of it on TikTok and stuff, but there'd be all these people being like, "Oh, this is the, you know, galaxy system, me and my 12 alters," and all that insane stuff. There was the TikTok person who claimed to have, I believe they claimed to have DID, and it was them and another person. They claimed to be called Jesse and James, and their 2 personalities were in love with each other.
Oh, yeah, I do remember hearing about that. Didn't they, did they get proven to be, like, not actually...
I have no idea, because I don't keep up to date on that kind of stuff, because it kind of just, like, skeeves me out.
I remember watching a video essay about them. Let me see if I could search up while I'm talking. It was about this Jesse and James not alter. What's the word? Is it alter?
Well, alters refer to, you know, the other personalities. There's the host, and then there's all the alters. There could be, you know, a protector. There could be littles. There could be all that kind of stuff. But this person was, like, you know, co-hosts, Jesse and James, and they were in love with each other.
I remember watching a video essay about it. I can't seem to find it right now, but yeah, it was basically this person who had claimed to say that they had not only a DID, but that their characters, was it Jesse and James specifically from Pokemon, or did they just happen to be named Jesse and James?
I think they just so happen to be named those two.
Okay. Well, the video essay I saw was from somebody who is also in the field of psychology and mental health studies, and basically talking about how the platform that they have, if it is true that this is their reality and they're telling the truth, that it actually is harmful to be presenting the disorder in this way as sort of a fun little quirk about yourself, rather than the realities of living with multiple people, in layman's terms, multiple people in one brain. How it's harmful to show it off as a fun little quirk about your personality is showing to be harmful to younger generations.
Yeah. There's also the glorification of stuff like autism. I don't know if you've seen that,
Oh, I've seen that.
but I've seen people be like, my son is quote unquote acting autistic for attention and stuff.
Oh no, that's not good.
And it's not even like it's the and there's just like all these posts online. It's like, if you do this, you have ADHD. It's like, if you tap your foot on the floor, you have ADHD. It as someone who's going into the psychological field, something like that really upsets me, because just because you crack your knuckles or just because you tap your foot, it doesn't mean that you have something, and people just want to label themselves to feel special. This might be a hot take, but it's something that I am really passionate about, because I believe in getting correct diagnoses.
Well, it's not just a hot take. It's something that you have done research into proving why you believe the way you do. It's
Yeah.
not just something that has a hollow backing point. This is something you've done a lot of research on, a lot of, I should say, unbiased research in, and taking multiple sources.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know, maybe the whole thing is just because I'm a psych major, and maybe I'm just too insane about it. But taking information from TikTok, just because, oh, I like to eat certain foods and I don't like to explore that, oh, that must mean I'm autistic. It's not like groundbreaking and like amazing that you're like, oh, I have autism. There's a lot of like harmful stuff that happens when you get diagnosed with autism. People single you out, people bully you. It's not something to be like, wow, guys, this is the best thing in the world.
There's another TikToker a couple years ago who was making a lot of circles, who went by the name of Ticks and Roses. And, and I know this is not news for those of you who stay on top of it, but Ticks and Roses was a person who used their platform. They promoted themselves claiming that they had Tourette's syndrome and that they suffered from violent tics and tic attacks and many ailments. They sold merch based off of this. They made tons of money, lots of followers. Eventually, people really in the Tourette syndrome community started realizing that this is not normal behavior for somebody with this condition. They were trying to act like it was, again, a cute little addition to who they were, something that made them special, something that separated them from the other creators, instead of just being a creator who happens to have it. And I don't think there's a problem with your mental illness being your forefront if it's for a good reason. I find that this issue of people around our age, or even, millennials, have this obsession of wanting a label. And I feel that these people who genuinely do suffer from these problems need to be very careful with how they present it, because, lots of people are on TikTok, lots of age groups, lots of different cultures. So I've seen plenty of people, with Tourette's, with Down syndrome, autism, parents of autistic children, who take their platform very seriously, and they take that opportunity to educate their audience. And that, I think, is the most responsible thing to do and the best thing to do. Or, you know, you can just have the condition and make your content based off of something else. Those aren't the only two options, as if I'm some type of authority that you have to listen to, but those seem to be, at least from what I've seen, the most beneficial for the community. You know, either from an educational standpoint or just, you know, a blog type standpoint from somebody who happens to have some type of illness. I tried to mix the word ailment and illness, and it came out weird. But moving forward with the whole young people looking for an identity through mental illness or just illness in general, I watched this video essay by the YouTuber, I think this is pronounced Ali Sunvia. I don't know. But she talks a lot about psychology and mental illness as well. I don't know if she's a psychology major as well, but she made this video called The Desire to Be Sad, Tragically Beautiful Art in Romanticizing Mental Illness. So very similar to what we're talking about here, but she takes it in a bit of a different direction, specifically talking about modern days and social media, which I know you're going to touch on more. But to cite her, she states this idea of searching for a meaning in our suffering. And I feel like the reason why people these days innately want labels is because they want their questions about why they act the way they are to be answered. I actually learned a lot about this in a course I'm taking this year. I believe it's called Assessments for the Foundations of the Inclusive Classroom. It's a class I need to take to get my special education certification. We talked a lot about perceptions of mental illness and perceptions of disability in media. We went up to the whiteboard and wrote down several different media characters who represented it. I wrote down Daredevil. For those of you who don't know, he's a superhero that is blind. Some people wrote down from Glee, Arnie, the kid in the wheelchair, Drake, his character from Degrassi, he was in a wheelchair, the Good Doctor, who is a surgeon who lives with autism. And I talked about Rain Man and how it isn't the most productive representation of an autistic person. I haven't watched the movie fully. I've just watched the scenes that people most notably talk about, in particular the diner scene where he displays his savant-like attributes. For those of you who don't know, you can just look up Rain Man toothpick scene. There's a scene where they're in a diner and somebody spills a packet of toothpicks, and the moment they all hit the floor, he's able to immediately say how many toothpicks are on the floor. And I've also seen other doctors and mental health specialists say that this is not a great representation because it sort of puts autism in the light of it's a superpower and it's always a great thing to have, and there's absolutely no downsides to living with it, and you should shoot to be like this person. Now, I don't think having a role model who happens to have mental illness is a bad thing. I think your role model is your role model no matter what. But I agree that this idea that we are championing something that a lot of people struggle with can be taken in a bad light. We don't want these people suffering, or even not using the word suffering, just hard times in general and inconveniences. We shouldn't look at that and say, yeah, but you know, they have the superpower of A, B, and C, so they shouldn't be complaining. It's not the most productive way to look at things. The same thing could be said about The Good Doctor, where in every episode that he's in, he happens to be correct about I shouldn't say every, again, I haven't watched every episode of the show. He happens to be correct about almost every single analysis that he does. And that superhero-like accuracy can be a bit misleading to what people living with autism actually go through.
And like, granted, some you know, some division of autism, like when people have it, they can have, you know, a heightened intelligence in some areas. I know in some cases people may have a, you know, a higher likeness to, you know, math or science or one of those subjects. But there's always like, you know, the up and the down. The thing that's often combined with that is like when people are, you know, super smart in one degree, they're lacking in another, and it's often linked with, oh, you're really good at math, but you are really bad at social cues and stuff like that.
So, if I may, if I could take a minute to go on to my half that I wanted to talk about. Of course, we'll come back to the rest of your iPad of notes, but this goes into what I was doing today for my research for this episode, which a big goal of mine that I wanted to do more is read. Like a couple years ago, me and my dad went to Barnes & Noble because he had a bunch of gift cards, and he told me to just pick out a bunch of books I was interested in. And I got a bunch of different music books. I got Playing Changes by Nate Chinen, a History of Music by Ted, I want to say it's pronounced Gioia. It's Gioia. It's a weird spelling. And then For the Love of Music by John, last name that starts with M. I can't see the book from where I'm sitting. And the book that I'm reading, I haven't read those yet because I'm very bad with planning my reading schedule. But the one that I'm reading right now is called Musicophilia, Tales of Music in the Brain by Oliver Sacks, also known as the author of The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat, New York Times national bestseller book. And in this book, it talks a lot about literally music and psychology, so the perfect blend of what we've got going on here, of art and psychology working together. There's a chapter called 2000 Operas, Musical Savants, and it's here where Mr. Sachs discusses a man who is an adult, but he suffers from, I don't remember if it says exactly what developmental illness he has, but he does suffer from a developmental illness. And he is a musical savant to where he has absolute pitch, perfect tonal memory. Every time he listens to an opera, he could tell you every single instrument's part, every single vocal part, all the words. And I wanted to read this little autism. Yes, it says right here. One teacher wrote to me about a student who had a mild, he uses the R word here, but I can't, I'm not going to say that. Hydrocephalus and seizures in addition to his autism. And here is the letter that she wrote to the author. He cannot tie his shoes. He cannot add 3 plus 2, but he can play you a movement of a Beethoven symphony and can transpose it to any key. He seems to have a rich understanding of the grammar of conventional harmony. I have been having him listen to more complex harmonies, including Debussy and Berg Piano Sonata, the opening of Tristan, and Ligeti Piano Etudes. And he can improvise now using any of these harmonic languages. He has a tremendous love of music, and when he's playing well, which is not always, his playing is extraordinarily beautiful and moving. Again, that's Musicophilia, Tales of Music in the Brain by Oliver Sacks. Great book. I'm on chapter 13 right now, and I'm hoping to have it done by the end of the week. But I thought that was also interesting. Savantism is something that we know about, but we don't always know the full extent of it. I believe he also goes on to say something akin to savantism is a way of life. We always look at the special abilities that they have, but we don't realize that the other 90% of their life is somebody who has a very hard time doing simple things like feeding themselves or being able to properly intake different senses in one activity. And we always want to look at the special part of it without truly understanding what the people go through. And that's where, again, I find this labeling issue to be problematic. Do you have any other examples or any other segues to go on to?
Well, I just remembered when I was talking about the person who was faking. Well, not faking. Sorry, I'm not gonna say that. When I was just thought of the person who said that they had DID. The one that was Jesse and James. They were called, I believe, Two Souls, One Bod, which was a very interesting thing to remember. And all I can really like think about is, there's just been this like there's always been this glorification on the internet of like things that aren't good. Like mental illness is one of them, and we've like, talked about that one a bunch. Another one I would say is that has popped up in recent time that has been really, really glorified in the recent years, are like, mommy and daddy issues and stuff like that. People glorify, familial issues like mommy and daddy issues, which usually pertain.
So is mommy and daddy issues just when your mom or dad isn't present in your early life? Is that
It's
all
not
it is?
even that like they're not present. That can be, one of the reasons why you have, mommy or daddy issues. It also could be, a lacking relationship with one of your parents. Like, let's say, you have a dad. Your dad was in your life, but he wasn't emotionally there for you. He was really never taking part in your life, and it was kind of just like another person was in the house, but not really your father, even though you called him your father.
So it's just a very distant, unwelcome relationship between a parental figure.
Yeah, it could be that, or it could be the literal of not having, you know, a father, or it could even be, just a really toxic, abusive relationship that could lead to that. But there has been this glorification of those issues, like I believe it's an Arctic Monkeys song, Daddy Issues. That song is great, but there's a slight glorification to it. I could get into a whole other conversation about social media and a lot of other stuff.
I'm sure you could. I mean, anybody who's on any type of artistic side of TikTok will see. One thing I used to love watching, which I'm trying to stop watching now, is a genre which is called core, specifically the ones tailored to young men. For those of you who don't know, core, from my experience, has been videos that are like overly trying to get emotions out of you, particularly negative and sad ones. Playing movie clips that are very emotional, maybe a scene of somebody getting cheated on or an abusive relationship, accompanied by very sad music, either it be, very sad lyrical music or very sad instrumental piano, for example. It'll show comics about, an disgusting or unfortunate situation that somebody's going through, perpetuating the idea of loneliness. And I can see core has helped me in the past. There's days where I never knew I needed a good cry, and then core just helps it get that, dark cloud out of me. But when it keeps popping up, it's not always beneficial to watch it, because then it creates a negative relationship with you and your phone, which a lot of people already have a bad relationship with, which we can talk about another time. But it creates a negative relationship with that, and it means that the only time you're allowed to express emotions is when you're sad, and any other emotion is ingenuine, and it's not really expression. I think that there are times when, if you're sad, instead of having to cry it out, you can cheer up. And to say that that's never happened to you is false. I mean, every person has been cheered up from a bad time. It doesn't have to be always the solution. There is such a thing as toxic positivity, where you have friends that want to, they're not giving you a space to cry or to let your emotions out in private. They are forcing you to be happy. But to close out today's episode, I wanted to talk about sad music and sad art and different things that we have seen, maybe personal experiences or ideas you have that have made you sad, or that are pieces that give you a lot of emotional responses.
There's the iconic there's the iconic art piece called I Can't Help Myself or something like that. Can't Help Myself. To summarize it, it's this big hydraulic machine that is surrounded in a reddish, oilish looking liquid, and it has to move a little scraper around, and it scrapes the oil back towards itself. People started creating rumors that it was the oil of the machine to keep it alive, but that's not true. It was just a liquid. And I believe it was going, I forget where it was, but this machine had to keep, pushing the oil back towards itself. And there's this eerie sadness that you would see when it was towards the end of its I want to say quote unquote lifetime. Granted, it's just a robot doing what it was programmed to do, but there was this sadness you would see, because when it first started it would happily go around and push all the liquid back towards itself. But by the time it reached the end of its quote-unquote life, it was a lot slower. The hydraulics, it's been going for a couple years now, so the hydraulics had slowed. It had the room that it was in, it was this glass room, had gone from this stark white with clean glass to now it was splattered and the walls were messy and it had liquid dripping down it. And it kind of gave this eerie sadness to it, because even though it's this robot doing something that it was told to do, and, it was programmed to do what it was supposed to do, that it has this weird vibe to it that just made you feel bad for the robot. And a lot of art does that. There's been art that are, I forget what it was called, but this woman, she stood in a room with a bunch of tools on a table, and she stood there. It was a performative art piece, and there's a bunch of people, and it was basically, she welcomed the people to touch any of the materials and touch any of her. It started off with people putting stuff on her body, but then it escalated into the insanity of people cutting off her clothing, were cutting her, threatening her with a gun, because there was a gun on the table, a loaded gun. And a guy stood there and sat with the gun to her head, and she stood there. And I believe she said it was one of the most traumatic experiences of her life, because all of her clothing were cut off of her. She ended nude and, had cuts on her, and people were violating her. And art is insane. That's one of the pieces that shakes me to my core, out of many pieces that shake me to my core. There's one with Candy. I won't go into too much detail because I can talk about, tragic art forever. But the one performative piece of that one woman will always freak me out, shake me to my core, and make me very, very emotional. Whenever I hear or talk about it, I get very emotional, because it's the insanity of people and what they're willing to do to another person.
Yeah, and it's the idea of, if you could get away with it, how far would you go? Because this woman knows, I would assume going into it, that her life is on the line, and if her life is taken from her, it's her setup. She knows that.
She knew full well that it was very much possible that since she had a gun on the table, that it was very possible that someone could come in there, grab the gun, and shoot her.
And I'm sure she probably told, security and police in the area, if something happens, don't interfere unless it gets out of hand. But that is the whole duality of man that we always love to try to reach into in the music and art world. Music, it's kind of hard to do that, because it's not the same type of performative interaction with your audience and your viewers. And with the robot one, I also find it kind of sad. Eventually, I believe it did die, right? I think it died last year or 2 years ago.
It's not that it died. The creators of it, which are a couple from Japan, they do a lot of intense performative and art. One of their art pieces was done with all roadkill. They do a lot of intense art. It didn't die. They just turned it off. That was another rumor, other than the oil and the it killed itself, all that kind of stuff. The creators just shut it off, but it's a sad thing to see how it weathered over time.
Yeah, but the reason why it hit me hard was, I mean, as people, I feel like that anything with movement that has a purpose, we immediately want to personify it. And that's why our possessions often, we name our cars. I name my instruments. We don't laugh at me.
I
I
didn't laugh at
name
you. I named my French horn.
we we have deep connections to these things that they don't have a soul, they don't have a brain, they don't have a heart, they don't have a functioning system of operation to where to the same that we are, any other organism is. But we have personification to things that serve a purpose because we like to think that we serve a purpose. And if this robot that shovels in red liquid knows that its purpose, again, I had to stop myself from saying his because many people will, I myself included, I always try to not get too close to things that I know are not real because I know how deeply it can affect me. But I mean, I know that when I first heard about that, it took me a while to really digest its purpose, and it makes us think about our purpose, and it's just a very well done piece of art. From the music perspective, it's more so our job as musicians to share either our story or the story of somebody we know through the medium of music. And many people do that literally. People do it in smart, different ways. Two pieces I want to talk about are more on the literal side. In the future, I would like to go on this again and talk more about ways of mysteriously going into a message. The first piece I want to talk about is a country song called If You Get There Before I Do by Colin Ray. And as you could probably guess by the title, it's about, losing a loved one. The lyrics revolve around a young Colin Ray, I would assume, with his grandfather. And the intro verse says, I read a note my grandma wrote back in 1923. Grandpa kept it in his coat and read it once to me. He said, boy, you might not understand, but a long, long time ago, Grandma's daddy didn't like me none, and I loved your grandma so. We had this crazy plan to meet and run away together, get married in the first town we came to and run away together. But nailed to the tree where we were supposed to meet instead, I found this letter, and this is what it said. And the letter says, if you get there before I do, don't give up on me. I'll meet you when my chores are through. I don't know how long I'll be. But I'm not going to let you down. Just wait and see. And between now and then, till I see you again, I'll be loving you. Love me. Highly recommend you listen to it. It's a very, very touching story.
I'm gonna cry.
I know. Country music has a way of moving people. And the way it's written, the guitar, the layering of voices and the layering of more instruments as it comes in, it's stuff that I always love to take and borrow in my own composition. Very, very good storytelling from Colin Ray and many other country musicians. I believe that if you need inspiration on how to tell a good story, listen to country music. In another genre, musical theater, that I also love is my favorite musical that Tick, Tick, Boom. If you haven't watched the musical or the movie, highly recommend it. Andrew Garfield does a great job in the movie. Raul Esparza does a fantastic job in the stage production. There is a solo song called Why, where the young Jonathan Larson, also known as the real-life composer of the show Rent, talks about how he's turning 30 years old. He hasn't made a clear, successful show yet because his dream was to be a composer. And he's basically talking about, why do I do what I do? And the song is kind of a little intro and open door into his life story. He talks about how when he was a kid and he was in a play, eventually going into high school and doing shows there, how he had memories of and hopes of saying, I'm going to live my life this way. It comes to a big boiling point at the end where he ends up singing a song that he himself wrote that's relating to his own life story. And eventually it comes to just him saying, I'm going to spend my life this way, and putting his foot down and saying, this is my purpose and this is the way I choose to live. So, in conclusion,
Tick, Tick, Boom makes me sob. In conclusion, Tick Tick Boom will always make me cry.
It's a very...
I've sobbed so many tears to that musical.
If you are a creative in any sense of the word, whether it be your livelihood or something that you just dabble into, I highly, highly recommend you watch that movie. It's really, really something spectacular, and the music is, man, it's one of the best one of the best musical soundtracks I've ever listened to. Some of my favorites to sing and play. But you know what? I think we can call it for today's episode.
Yep.
Remember when we said we wanted to make this one 30 minutes long? Yeah. But yeah, we got a bit deeper than usual in this one, and I kind of like it.
We'll maybe be silly in the next episode. Maybe
we'll be silly. But I think that this was a really cool, productive discussion, and I hope people learned a lot from it. I know I did.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you for listening to the Melodies and Masterpieces podcast, the only podcast by creatives for creatives. I'm Omar. That's Laurel. Check out our socials and eat food, drink water,
and have a good night.
Bye-bye.